I imagine the tenderness of it, the fullness, the way love might finally have somewhere to land. And yet, I have always wanted motherhood, quietly, carefully, as if wanting it too loudly might make it slip away. Every time the thought of pregnancy drifts too close, fear rises up to meet it. Not gentle fear, not cautious fear, terror. The kind that tightens my chest and makes my body feel like a fragile thing I must protect from itself. I want to carry life, but I am terrified of what that life might cost me. My body has never felt like a safe place. Loving it already feels like a negotiation, and pregnancy feels like a demand I'm not sure I can meet. I worry about the changes, the stretching, the exposure. I worry that pregnancy will ask more of my body than it is capable of giving, especially my breasts, the part of me I have spent a lifetime doubting. The question haunts me in quiet moments, in the dark, when I'm alone with my thoughts. Will pregnancy destroy what little I have? It feels shameful to even think it, but the fear doesn't listen to shame. My breasts already feel so small, so delicate, like they are barely holding their place on my body. I imagine them changing in ways I can't control, growing too fast, stretching too far, becoming unfamiliar and damaged. I imagine pain I won't survive emotionally. I imagine myself standing in the mirror afterward, looking at a body that feels even more betrayed. My anxiety fills the gaps where reassurance should be. It creates stories, vivid, frightening ones, bursting, tearing, deformity, images I didn't ask for, looping in my mind as if pregnancy were a violent force instead of a natural process. I know these thoughts are extreme, but fear doesn't need logic. It only needs vulnerability, and I have plenty of that. I don't just fear physical pain. I fear confirmation. I fear pregnancy will prove what I've always suspected, that my body is weak, that it cannot handle transformation, that it will collapse under the weight of becoming more. I fear that my breasts, already a source of deep insecurity, will become evidence of my failure rather than symbols of nourishment and life. Sometimes I feel selfish for these fears. Other women talk about pregnancy with excitement, glowing anticipation, pride. I listen and feel like an imposter, like my fear disqualifies me from womanhood itself. I want the baby, the bond, the meaning, but I'm afraid of the mirror afterward, afraid of what I'll see, afraid I won't recognize myself, or worse, that I'll recognize everything I've ever hated. Pregnancy feels like standing at the edge of something sacred and terrifying at the same time, a doorway I long to walk through, but one that threatens to strip me bare, physically, emotionally, completely. I fear that my body, already under scrutiny from my own mind, will not survive the exposure. And yet, beneath the terror, the dream still breathes. Quietly, persistently, a dream wrapped tightly in fear, waiting for me to believe, somehow, that my body is not as fragile as I've been taught to think. Pregnancy lives in my mind as two opposing truths that refuse to meet peacefully. On one side, it is tender and luminous, a dream stitched with hope. On the other, it is overwhelming, invasive, terrifying. Wanting motherhood has never been simple for me. It has always come with a quiet bargaining. I want this, but can my body survive it? I imagine holding a child and feel something soften inside me. I imagine purpose, connection, a love so large it might finally silence the constant doubt. But the moment the dream grows vivid, fear rushes in to reclaim its space. My body enters the picture, and the fantasy fractures. I stop seeing cradles and tiny hands and start seeing my reflection, changed, stretched, unfamiliar. Pregnancy feels like a demand placed on a body I have never trusted. I already live with the sense that my body is barely enough as it is. My breasts, so small and so central to my insecurity, feel like the most vulnerable part of me, like they are already on the edge of failure. When I think about pregnancy, I don't imagine natural change. I imagine damage. I imagine being pushed beyond my limits. I imagine my body betraying me in ways I won't be able to undo. And the question I can't silence, no matter how much I try, is this: will pregnancy destroy what little I have? It feels cruel, almost obscene, to reduce something as sacred as motherhood to fear over my breasts. But fear doesn't respect ideals or guilt. It goes straight for the places that already hurt. My breasts already feel like proof of my inadequacy, and pregnancy feels like a spotlight, bright, unavoidable, exposing. My anxiety fills the silence with images I never asked for. Myths take shape in my mind and masquerade as truths. I imagine my breasts stretching too fast, the skin unable to keep up, tearing under pressure. I imagine them becoming distorted, painful, ruined, words that echo my deepest fears about my body. In my mind, pregnancy becomes violent instead of organic, something that happens to me rather than through me. These thoughts don't come from ignorance alone. They come from years of believing my body is fragile, from a lifetime of seeing my smallness as a warning sign. If my breasts couldn't grow the way they were supposed to, how can I believe they will change safely now? How can I believe they won't break under the weight of becoming something new? What terrifies me most is not just pain, it's confirmation. The fear that pregnancy will validate every cruel belief I've ever held about myself. That afterward, standing in the mirror, I will see a body that looks even more like a mistake. That I will mourn not just the changes, but the loss of whatever fragile confidence I managed to build. I listen to other women talk about pregnancy with excitement, even pride. Their voices glow with certainty. I sit quietly, nodding, feeling like I'm watching something from behind glass. I wonder what it feels like to trust your body so completely, to believe it is capable, strong, designed for this. My fear makes me feel like an outsider, not just to pregnancy, but to womanhood itself. And still, the dream refuses to die. Despite the terror, despite the myths my anxiety spins, I still want motherhood. I want to believe my body can be more than a source of shame. I want to believe my breasts could become symbols of nourishment instead of inadequacy. But wanting requires courage, and courage feels risky when your body has always felt like a liability. Pregnancy to me is standing at the edge of transformation, one foot pulled forward by longing, the other anchored by fear. It is a dream wrapped tightly in terror, waiting for me to unlearn the lie that my body is too small, too weak, too fragile to carry life. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing my breasts as just a part of my body and started seeing them as a diagnosis. Small became synonymous with weak. Delicate became dangerous. I told myself a story so often that it hardened into belief. My body is fragile, and fragility means failure. I don't remember consciously choosing this narrative. It formed quietly, built from years of comparison and doubt. Every time I looked at my chest, I didn't just see size, I saw limitation. I convinced myself that if my breasts were small, then my body must be incapable of holding abundance, as if strength were measured in fullness, as if resilience only lived in volume. I confused size with strength because that's what the world taught me to do. Bigger meant better. Fuller meant capable. Softness meant readiness. And by that logic, I placed myself on the losing side of biology. I looked at my breasts and felt like my body had opted out of something essential, like it had chosen minimalism where survival required excess. This belief seeped into how I understood my own biology. I began to feel inadequate on a level that went beyond appearance. It wasn't just that I felt unattractive, it was that I felt unfit, unprepared, as though my body hadn't been designed for the demands of womanhood. Pregnancy, breastfeeding, nurturing, these felt like things meant for other bodies, better bodies, bodies that didn't look like mine. Softness, in my mind, became a requirement I failed to meet. I told myself that my small breasts meant I lacked the natural resources other women had, that my body wouldn't know what to do when asked to nourish, to grow, to sustain life. I treated my chest like evidence, proof that something about me was biologically incomplete. This belief hurt in ways I rarely admitted. It created a deep emotional trauma that lived quietly beneath everything else. I didn't just fear judgment from others, I feared disappointment from my own body. I distrusted it. I expected it to fail me. I spoke to it with suspicion instead of care, as though it were a weak structure that might collapse under pressure. Feeling biologically inadequate is a particular kind of pain. It doesn't scream, it corrodes. It makes you question your place in the natural order of things. It makes you wonder if you were built incorrectly, if you missed an evolutionary step everyone else completed. It turns womanhood into a test you believe you've already failed. I carried this trauma silently. I smiled through conversations about pregnancy and motherhood while feeling like an imposter. I listened to stories of bodies changing and adapting and thriving, and I felt separate, like my body existed on a different rulebook. I feared that when the time came, my body would expose me, that it would confirm every doubt I had ever held about its strength. The fragile body narrative didn't just hurt my confidence, it shaped my identity. It made me cautious where I wanted to be brave, afraid where I wanted to trust. It taught me to see my body as a liability instead of a resource, a risk instead of a resource. And the most painful part is this: my body never told me it was weak. I decided that for it. I learned it. I repeated it, until the story felt truer than my own lived experience. This chapter of my fear is not really about my breasts. It's about the meaning I attached to them, about how I mistook smallness for incapacity and softness for failure, about how deeply I internalized the idea that my body was not enough to carry the life I long for. And breaking this narrative feels terrifying, because it would mean admitting that maybe, all along, my body was never fragile at all. The story I tell myself about my body is not neutral. It is heavy, inherited, and unforgiving. It follows me quietly, shaping how I move, how I hope, how I fear. I didn't just decide that my body was fragile, I learned it. I absorbed it from glances, from silences, from the way fullness was praised and smallness was pitied. Over time, my breasts stopped being flesh and became symbols, symbols of what I believed I lacked. I learned to read my body like a warning label. Small breasts meant weakness, minimal curves meant inability. I began to believe that my body was built with less margin for error, less tolerance for change, as if there was a limited supply of strength in me and it had already been used up. I told myself that resilience lives in abundance, that bodies like mine are too delicate to endure pressure. This belief is cruel because it feels logical. It disguises itself as realism. I told myself I was just being honest, just being prepared for disappointment. But beneath that so-called honesty was fear, raw and unexamined. I equated size with strength because it gave my insecurity a structure. If I could explain my fear biologically, then it felt justified, scientific. I wasn't insecure, I told myself. I was simply aware. Softness in my mind became a requirement I failed to meet. I convinced myself that my body lacked the necessary substance to nurture, to sustain, to expand. And I imagined pregnancy and motherhood as forces that demand excess. More tissue, more capacity, more room. And I looked at my chest and saw scarcity. I saw limitation. I saw a body that would struggle to rise to the occasion. This is where the trauma deepened, from appearance into identity. Feeling biologically inadequate is not just about how you look, it's about how you belong. It makes you feel misplaced in your own womanhood, like you were given a body that didn't come with the full set of instructions. I felt as though nature had overlooked me, or worse, misjudged me, as though my body had opted out of a role I desperately wanted to play. I stopped trusting my body's intelligence. I doubted its ability to adapt, to respond, and to know what to do when the moment arrived. I imagined my breasts as passive, unprepared, almost fragile to the point of danger. I treated them like porcelain, something that might crack under pressure, instead of transform through it. This belief didn't just stay in my head, it settled into my emotions. It made me anxious in moments that should have felt hopeful. It made me cautious when I wanted to be excited. It made me feel like motherhood was a test designed for bodies unlike mine. I began to see myself as an exception, not in a special way, but in a failing one. And the pain of that belief is lonely. I listened to conversations about pregnancy and breastfeeding with a quiet ache, feeling like an observer rather than a participant. I smiled while feeling separate, as though my body had already been disqualified. I feared that if I dared to trust it, it would humiliate me by proving me wrong, so I chose mistrust instead. Mistrust felt safer than hope. The fragile body narrative became my armor. If I expected weakness, then failure wouldn't surprise me. If I believed my body was incapable, then fear felt rational. But armor is heavy, and wearing it for too long bruises the skin beneath. What I am only beginning to understand, slowly, reluctantly, is that this narrative was never written by my body. My breasts never told me they were weak. My biology never confessed inadequacy. These were conclusions I reached after years of listening to voices that equated worth with volume and capability with size. The trauma is not in my flesh, it is in the meaning I assigned to it. And unraveling this story feels terrifying, because it would mean letting go of the explanation I've used for my fear. It would mean admitting that maybe, all along, my body was never fragile at all. There is a kind of fear that doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers, shadows every glance, and settles in your chest like a weight that refuses to lift. For me, it begins with being seen, not in the casual, everyday way that the world sees people, but truly seen, naked, vulnerable, unvarnished. The thought of someone, my partner, a doctor, even my own reflection looking at my body, makes my stomach coil tight with dread. I have always been painfully aware of my breasts, their smallness, the way they curve too little, the way they fail to elicit admiration even in fleeting moments. I have tucked them away under layers of clothing, padded bras, and self-conscious postures, praying that no one would notice, that no one would see what I feared was inadequate. But now, in pregnancy, hiding feels impossible. My breasts swell, sensitive to every touch, a public signal of the life growing within me, Yet to me they feel grotesque, alien, impossible to love. I stare at them in the mirror, and the reflection is both mine and not mine. A vessel of creation, yes, but also a canvas of my insecurities. Every interaction becomes a test of courage. A midwife's professional examination is transformed into a stage where I'm unwillingly performing, stripped of control. My partner's touch, once comforting, now carries a weight I cannot measure. Will he see